This is Mr. Crayson coming at you with another video, this time on nationalism and sectionalism in the early American government. So nationalism and sectionalism, a division based on regional interests, are simultaneously happening and growing throughout the early American nation. How is that possible? That's the question for today. First up, the Louisiana Purchase. So in 1803, Thomas Jefferson was president, and he's a Democratic Republican. They are strict constructionists, unlike the Federalists, who were loose constructionists. What does that mean? Well, Jefferson would say the only thing a president or Congress or courts can do at a national level is what the Constitution says it can. And in this case, he didn't want all of Louisiana. That wasn't on his mind. He wanted the port of New Orleans, which had changed hands from Spain to France. And so the deposit on the New Orleans port that was given to us previously in Pinckney's treaty was now gone. And Jefferson wants that back. He sends diplomats to go buy this back. Napoleon is struggling in France. He's fighting against Britain. And with the recent Haitian Revolution of Toussaint Louverture, he also lost Haiti. So America right now for him is just a losing battle. And he's willing to sell it off, all this territory that France has. And so he offers for $15 million to the Americans. So America takes the deal. And now we've doubled the size of the country. Jefferson does have some scruples with it. You know, he became a loose constructionist essentially for a moment there. I'm sure many sleepless nights were lost over this, but ultimately he's going to say, well, this is a power of a president to usher in a treaty. And this particular treaty doubled the size of the United States. He's also able to sleep at night because this now makes his agrarian vision for America more possible. The idea that now we have all this new farmland and it will be a nation of farmers. It also opens up sectional tensions between the North and the South as, will this new land have slaves or not? Last week, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 said that there will be no slaves in the Northwest Territories, and it defined those territories, which includes us, Illinois. But the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 didn't say anything about Louisiana Territory, all that area beyond. So the first territory to want to become a state in the Louisiana Territory will be Missouri in 1818, and this is going to cause sectional tension. A Kentucky congressman named Henry Clay will come up with the solution. The Missouri Compromise, or Compromise of 1820, you can call it, is going to decide that Missouri, you get what you want. You're a slave state. However, there's a state way up in the Northeast that has these two separate areas. Massachusetts, we're looking at you. We're going to split you into two, and that little extra portion in the Northeast is going to become a new state called Maine. It will be a free state, and now we continue to balance the congressional split between slave and free states at now 12 states to 12 states free to slave owning. The southern border of Missouri is going to play a really important role as well in this compromise. 36 degrees, 30 minutes north latitude is that border, and they stretch it out to the west. Any territory that wants to be a state above it, north of it, will be a free state. Any state below that will be a slave state. Is this going to be the forever solution? No. Is this going to temporarily put a Band-Aid on this sectional tension? Yes, until 1850. In the case of Marbury versus Madison of 1803, Chief Justice John Marshall is going to give the central government way more power by creating judicial review. Here, Chief Justice John Marshall and the Supreme Court got original jurisdiction to decide the case. And Marshall, a Federalist, probably would have loved to have another Federalist judge in a lower court like Marbury, and, deciding to go that way could have been a victory for the Federalists. However, he sees the bigger picture. So the Judiciary Act of 1789 had a clause that allowed for this case to be directly seen within the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Marshall thought that that was an oversight, that this should have been something decided by a lower court first, and therefore deemed Judiciary Act of 1789 unconstitutional. And that's how he created judicial review. The courts can check laws made by the legislative branch and the executive orders by the executive branch, and any action taken by Congress or the president, for that matter. This is a huge step for central government getting more power. Marshall's going to do this again and again. Another big case to know, McCulloch versus Maryland. In this case, a state doesn't have the right to tax a federal entity because the power to tax is the power to destroy. And the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution says the national government is supreme to the states. The outcome of the War of 1812 is also really important in knowing how the national pride in America grew to a peak. It essentially ends in a tie. The Treaty of Ghent in 1814 is not like giving America all these new things, and in fact is just essentially keeping things the way they are. Any new grounds America got in Canada from Britain are wiped away. Like everything's kind of wiped clean for all intents and purposes. This is a draw of sorts. But if you go toe to toe with the biggest military in the world twice and live to tell the tale, you've got something to brag about. And that is the case with the American nation at this time. Not to mention in the Battle of New Orleans, where Andrew Jackson becomes this famous general for the Americans, they absolutely trounced the British, and it gives this sense that America won the war big when it really didn't. But we also said that sectionalism was simultaneously happening to some degree, right? And it does. The Hartford Convention takes place in Hartford, Connecticut, and it's a group of Federalists that are meeting. At the convention, they grumbled about the Democratic Republicans and about how this war was a Democratic Republican war and it was never going to end. They're literally meeting while the Treaty of Ghent is being signed. Again, news doesn't travel fast, right? The Federalists also entertain the idea of secession. It's dismissed very rapidly, but that fact gets out to the general public, and the Federalists look as un-American as can be. So this is going to be the death knell of the Federalists. This is where the Federalists lose their favor as a party from about 1816 all the way to about 1824, 1828. We are going to have pretty much one party that is dominating. It is the Democratic Republicans. This period will be known as the Era of Good Feelings. Can you guess why? In 1816, there's another event that's both creating national pride and sowing the seeds of sectionalism. It is the American system that is suggested by Henry Clay. So Congressman Henry Clay of Kentucky says, how about we do three things to make this nation stronger and unify it? How about number one, recharter the national bank, we need it. Number two, create tariffs on imports to prevent other goods from other countries being bought instead of American products. Buy American. And finally, use money from the tariffs to build roads and canals and infrastructure that's going to tie together this nation. But at the same time, sectional tension is growing because some of these things, like a national bank, might benefit the manufacturing northern region more than the southern region. Farmers don't trust the national bank, especially after the Panic of 1819. Farmers don't trust tariffs because it hurts their ability to sell crops to Britain, France, and other nations. And of course, there's plenty of disagreement over whether or not roads and canals and infrastructure in general is a national government responsibility or a state, local government responsibility. It sets up a lot of disagreements. So the American system is rather divisive, even though it's intended to unite the country. And finally, we've come to the corrupt bargain election. So the 1824 election was won between four different candidates, all running as Democratic Republicans. What? And so if you're doing that, the vote's going to get split, and it does. Nobody wins a majority. The House of Representatives will determine who the winner is. They're going to vote. One of the candidates drops out. William Crawford has a stroke. Henry Clay sees the writing on the wall that he's probably not going to pull this off. It would be a huge upset if he won. So he instead puts his support in an endorsement to John Quincy Adams. So John Quincy Adams wins, even though the popular vote went to Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson is going to be very upset, especially when he hears that Henry Clay has been named Secretary of State. But it kind of looks convenient, doesn't it, that Henry Clay is awarded with a position that is a very powerful position. Secretary of State is huge. Many presidents at that point had been Secretary of State prior to reaching the presidency. So, Jackson and his followers feel like this was sort of a setup, that a corrupt bargain had been made between Adams and Clay. And this is going to create a break or division in the Democratic Republicans that ends the era of good feelings. And you'll now have the National Republicans of John Quincy Adams and the Democrats of Andrew Jackson. So hopefully through this video you saw examples of how nationalism at first dominated the first 20 years of the 1800s, and then we saw sectionalism take over, and by the mid-1820s started to become more dominant to the point where we're going to have a civil war by 1861. Thanks for listening and have a really great rest of the day.